Hello. So today we're going to talk about an issue which I've wondered a lot about myself, and that is if you look back in time about 500 years in the English language, you get to Shakespeare or something like Shakespeare, and most of us can read Shakespeare, even if we can't necessarily work out exactly what's going on. We can recognise pretty much every word, and we can read a sentence and understand its meaning. Just takes a bit of concentration. But if you then look at a sort of 200-year gap between Old English and Middle English, it becomes an awful lot harder. Middle English, you can sort of pick out quite a lot of words, know what they mean. The spelling might be a bit strange, but you can sort of make sense of it. Whereas Old English is completely foreign to most of us, and to me as well. I can't read it very well unless I have a little dictionary on the side. So why is there so much change in that short period and then so little change uh, in modern English? It's worth looking at this from two angles, and those are grammar and pronunciation. So, towards the end of the Old English period, there was a massive loss of inflection. And inflection is sort of the bits you add to the ends of words, to the beginnings of words, to give them extra meaning. So, to conjugate them for case and for gender, grammatical gender, and things like that. And I think one major reason for this, I'm not sure, but I think one major reason for this is that there was a lot of immigration from Scandinavia, and there were a lot of people who spoke perhaps Brittonic languages that were already being spoken in Britain, having to learn English. And it's quite hard to learn these inflectional patterns. So, grammatical gender, even if your language has grammatical gender, which Old Norse did, it doesn't really help learning another language with grammatical gender unless the things line up one to one. So, for example, unless table is masculine in English and masculine in Old Norse, if everything has the same gender in the original language as in the language you're trying to learn, okay, that's fine. But that usually isn't the case, and that certainly wasn't the case between Old English and Old Norse. So I think one major thing is that people who spoke Old Norse natively couldn't necessarily be bothered to learn all of the grammatical genders, all of the subtleties of it in English, so they just didn't. So at this point in history, English had three grammatical genders, and those were masculine, feminine, and neuter, like in modern German. And we don't know exactly when those genders disappeared. We can see in the literature they disappear between about the 1000s and the 1200s. They sort of drop off. Less and less, fewer and fewer people use them until they're not in use at all anymore. But that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of how people were speaking, because in Latin, in Greek, even in English in the 1800s, there's a sort of written standard which is separate from the spoken standard. The spoken standard has certain innovations. It might have slang words, it might have different pronunciations that prescriptivists who actually write the language don't approve of, and so they don't write them down. So it takes a long time for these things in speech to actually catch on in writing. So although we know exactly when gender sort of started to drop off in writing, we don't necessarily know how long people had been being lax with it in speech prior to that. One way grammatical gender manifests is that in Old English you have loads of different forms of the definite article, so that's the word that in English, modern English, would be the. And that depends on gender and case. So you had se, sur, that, tha, thune, thus, thare, thora, thum, thu, thun. God knows how many little dialectal variants that never got written down. And by sort of 1200, 1300, you just had the, of which the weak form would probably have just been the. So the morn, the ski, the Nichtengale. And in fact, we have another factor, which is pronunciation. So when you read Chaucer, the reason you understand some words is because they're spelt very similarly to now. They weren't necessarily pronounced similarly. So Isawa the morn and the ski could easily be understood by somebody reading it nowadays, but you couldn't necessarily understand it if it was said out of context anyway. And Middle English had very similar pronunciation to Old English in terms of the vowels. There were some differences, but it was largely quite similar, as you'd expect. It was the great vowel shift that changed it from sort of incomprehensible to sort of within the realms of modern English comprehension. So in the 1400s you had Nichtingale, 1500s you had Nightingale, 1650s you had Nightingale, in the 1750s you had Nightingale. and of course now you have nightingale. So pronunciation leaps around a lot as well. And if you consider these two factors, it makes the sudden jump seem a lot less sudden. A lot of people use the fact that there's this apparent sudden jump between Old English and Middle English, as compared to any other period in English history, to suggest that perhaps English might be, modern English might be descended from French or from Latin or from whatever else. And I hope this helps to dispel that a bit, because it's a lot more seamless a transition than it looks on paper. And another misconception that I hope this dispels a little bit is the idea that the received pronunciation accent, the sort of accent that I speak and people around the southeast of England speak, is an invented accent, whereas it actually organically developed just like any other regional accent. It's just the regional accent of the southeast of England. Nobody sat around in a room and thought, let's invent this accent, which is what a lot of people seem to think, but I don't know that there's any linguistic basis for believing that. I think that's all for today. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.